Hey all you cool cucumbers and gastrula. My name is Mike and I am one of the keepers here at the Living Coast at Brookfield Zoo. And today we're going to be talking about echinoderms. So echinoderms are, they mean spiny skin, and they include starfish, sea urchins, and sea cucumbers. So let's take a closer look at some of these guys here. So these are bat stars, and they can be found kind of in Alaska down the Pacific coast. And if you look closely at maybe this guy here, you can see that they have these kind of rows of tube feet. So their vascular system is a water vascular system. So basically these are all kind of hydraulically controlled little legs that they use to move. And they can move a few feet every couple minutes or so. You can see this guy's cruising as far as starfish go. He's not a big fan of being on the window, I suppose, but so anyway, so they have their tube feet. These bat stars here at Living Coast are 15 years old, so they can live for quite some time. Obviously they live a pretty slow lifestyle, kind of moving around and then eating a little bit. As far as diet goes, these guys are omnivores, so they can eat meat-based things like shellfish, seafood and other things. They can also eat algae and stuff like that, so they like to get a little bit of variety. And we actually fed one about an hour ago. So if you look over here, so this animal was fed a shrimp, so you can see that sort of in the center. Their mouth is sort of on the center. They have an oral side and an aboral side, which is the top part of the starfish. So this is the underside of a star if you ever saw one out in the wild. So you can see the shrimp is sort of in the center of the mouth. And then they do this really amazing thing where they have two stomachs, and this is the cardiac stomach is one that they can actually evert onto their food item that they're trying to eat. So once they evert their stomach, they secrete digestive enzymes and they turn it into a delicious soup that they can sort of eat up. So he's right in the process, or I shouldn't say it is right in the process of digesting this piece of shrimp that we gave him about an hour ago. So yeah. So we can come back to these guys, but we can also look at some other echinoderms that we have here. So let's see if we can pry some of these guys apart. So these are brittle stars. So they're related to starfish. There's actually 5 of them here. You can see the body on that one there. There's 2 in that tussle pile, and then I think 3 in this one. So they are more of a detritivore, and they're named for their kind of snake-like patterns, and they're also called brittle stars, which means their arms are pretty brittle. They can actually lose them if a predator tries to grab them. So you can see how sinuously they move. So they do have some tube feet around the kind of body disc, but for the most part they're moving around with these kind of snake-like arms. And most of the time we have a bunch of them in all of our reef tanks. They're sort of a detritivore that comes in with the corals. So detritivore meaning they eat detritus, and for the most part they like to just live under the rockwork. So if you want to see one when you come and visit us, your best bet is to kind of look in all the rockwork of the reef systems that we have here at Living Coast. And then also in the group Echinodermata, which is the phylum of animal, are the sea urchins. So these are tuxedo urchins, and these are super special because they were actually aquarium raised by our friends at Henry Dorley Zoo and Aquarium, and they were actually born on January 28th, 2019, so a little over a year old. A lot of echinoderms, but not all of them, will spawn, so they'll lay eggs and release eggs and sperm, which meet in the water column. And then those get fertilized and they go through a bunch of pelagic life stages. So they'll float around on ocean currents until they reach their kind of later life stages, and then they'll settle back down onto the reefs. So a lot of urchins, although maybe not all of them, are herbivores, and they're very important in their ecosystem, so because they eat a lot of algae. So in the Caribbean, there's a long spine urchin, which is a really important one for keeping coral ecosystems going because they help eat the algae that might overtop new corals before they settle. On the Pacific coast, there's a purple sea star, which can eat kelp, so it can prevent kelp from growing too much. But if there are too many urchins, then they'll eat too much of the kelp, and they can cause kind of a collapse of the ecosystem. So they're very important for their ecosystems, and they're very kind of powerful in their ecosystems, depending on the species. So they're called spiny skin animals, and they have an endoskeleton. So this is an Urchin Test. So it's kind of, if you feel it, you can hear that. So it's kind of hard. You can see all these little rows of spots. That's where all the spines would attach to in the live urchin. And they have like a muscle that allows the spines to move. And then it looks like it's one solid piece. So actually here's the underside. So the mouth is here, and then the top is anus. And then it has, if you shine a light, you can see, I don't know if it's coming across well, but you can see all these little pores along the side. And those are kind of the umbilical grooves where all the tube feet will kind of pop out of the living animal. So hard to see when it's not being shown, but once you shine the light on it, you can see all those little pores that the tube feet will kind of emanate from. And then sea urchins have this kind of mouth part like this. It's called Aristotle's lantern, so it's kind of this complicated mouth part with 5 teeth here, and they use those teeth to rasp at algae. Some of them also like to dig holes for themselves in reefs, so they'll do a combo of using their spines to dig, and they can also use that kind of complicated, interesting mouth part that they have. So yeah. So that's a few of our echinoderms here. Happy to answer some questions that you guys have. We can watch him slowly digest his meal a little more if you'd like.
How long do all of these animals live?
Well, like I said, these guys are 15 years old this year. I think they can live kind of on the magnitude of decades for some of the larger cool water echinoderms. Some of the smaller echinoderms that live in tropical places may live only a year or two, but a lot of it also depends on predation and disease that they may be exposed to.
So can you remind us what kind of things they would eat?
Sure. So the bat stars are omnivores. So we feed them here. We feed them chopped fish, chopped shrimp, clam. They have this stomach, as you can see, that they evert onto their food. So if they were to eat something like shellfish, they can pry it open just a little bit of the way, and then they can evert their stomach into the partially open shell and digest their meal that way. So that's starfish. Starfishes, or sea stars if you prefer. They are echinoderms and not fishes. Urchins, most of them, or I don't know if I should say most, but many of them are herbivores that'll eat algae and plants and things like that. So,
how much would they eat in one day?
Well, these guys are cold water, so we feed them a couple times a week. They don't have a very fast metabolism because they're cold-blooded and they live in cold water. Their metabolism is pretty slow. So as long as they get a couple good meals here and there, they tend to be fine for a pretty long period of time.
What do the other side? What does the other side look like? Do you have any?
You might be able to see here.
Oh yeah.
You get a bit of an odd angle from the other side. You can see it's a little bit feathery, so they have sort of this. Their skin is sort of feathery, sort of its texture a little bit. That helps them breathe. So they don't have lungs per se. They have that water vascular system, and then they also can exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide through their skin.
So what other animals are they related to?
There would be like crinoids, sea pansies. If you ever find sand dollars on the beach, they'll be related to that. So the phylum Echinodermata is sort of a big one, and in many ways can be pretty significant ecologically.
How do the sea urchins protect themselves from predators?
Sure. So most of them have sharp spines. A handful of the species are actually venomous. So if you get stuck by the spine, it'll envenomate you, which will make it hurt even worse. A lot of the animals with longer spines, they're actually pretty brittle. So the spines can break and then get stuck in the predator that might be trying to eat them. So if you're ever at a beach, you want to be careful to look around for urchins and things. You don't want to bump into one. It's not super pleasant. But that said, people do eat sea urchin. If you're a sushi fan, uni is the kind of gonads of a sea urchin, so popular among sushi eaters. People also eat sea cucumbers, especially popular in kind of Asian cuisines. I'm sure there's someone somewhere that eats starfish, but it's not as common as sea cucumbers and sea urchins.
How does a starfish protect itself?
Again, so they have that same endoskeleton as a sea urchin, so we saw that test of the sea urchin. So they have, if you ever see like a dried out starfish, so they have that sort of hard ossicles. They're kind of a calcium endoskeleton right under their skin. So I guess by having a not great texture, that's kind of their best defense. But a lot of them will hide. Things like the brittle stars that we looked at love to just be hiding under a rock and eating kind of what little bit of detritus they can gather. So.
How can you tell if it's a boy or a girl?
I don't think any of them are sexually dimorphic, so you kind of got to wait until they spawn and see if they're releasing sperm or eggs.
Does it hurt if you touch a starfish? Like an urchin?
No. Their skin is pretty smooth-ish. I guess they all have different textures. So yeah, you should be okay to touch a starfish if you ever see one. But again, you don't want to necessarily touch wild animals if you see them.
So where in the ocean would they hang out? Not because they don't have a glass.
Sure. So all echinoderms are saltwater. A few of them may venture into kind of estuaries and things of that. But for the most part, they prefer to be in saltwater, so oceans and seas. They can live anywhere from the intertidal, where they may be exposed to air sometimes until the tide rolls back in, all the way down to the deep sea. So these bat stars, they live kind of close to shore in the intertidal, down to a few hundred meters maybe, but they're not necessarily a deep sea animal.
Someone just commented that one time they saw a penguin in a different tank from where they're normally in. Can you mention that real quick?
Sure. So at Living Coast, we have two separate populations of penguins. So one that lives with our sharks and in our bigger exhibit, and that's kind of normal for them. So they have the opportunity to swim with some fish versus the main population that's over towards the end of the Living Coast exhibit.
How many types of starfish are there?
That is a great question. There's total echinoderms, there's about 6,500 species, maybe up to about 7,000. As far as starfish, there are about 2,100 of those echinoderms are like brittle stars in that same kind of class, and then about 1,600 of the asteroideae, which look like this, kind of that typical star pattern and shape.
You fed this starfish about, an hour ago?
I gave it to him about an hour ago. Okay. Like I said, they live slowly, so it takes them about an hour to blurp out their stomach and start digesting their meal. But even as we've been talking, you can see that less and less of that shrimp is visible. So he's definitely starting the digestion process.
So how long would you say the whole digestion process is from getting fed?
Typically the next morning we'll have to remove what they don't consume. So they may not necessarily eat that entire bit of shrimp, but they'll dissolve what they can out of it and then eventually drop it and move along.
Do you have a favorite fact about any of these animals?
Sure. I mean, as far as the echinoderms, I think the tube feed and the fact that they move kind of with a hydraulic system is pretty cool. But I think pretty much any animal that you look at is going to have kind of an amazing fact, I suppose you could say. So the more you dig in, the more you learn, and the more you love all the animals. Well, thank you very much for joining us and learning a little bit about echinoderms. We're glad you were able to join us, and please make sure to join us on Facebook Monday through Friday at 11, and here on Instagram at 2 o'clock on Tuesday and Thursdays until we're open and we're able to greet you back, and we're really looking forward to that day. So thank you. Bye.